Marcus Chen adjusted his environmental suit as the transport shuttle descended through the toxic atmosphere of Kepler 442c. Around him, 23 other beings from various species chatted nervously in their native tongues, creating a symphony of clicks, growls, and harmonic tones that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But these weren't ordinary circumstances. They were all prisoners, condemned to survive on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, as part of the hegemony's newest entertainment venture. The Zephyrian Guard, a tall insectoid creature with iridescent carapace, spoke through the ship's communication system. Attention subjects. You are about to be deposited on Survival World 7. The rules are simple. Last being standing wins freedom and a full pardon. Resources are limited. Alliances are temporary. Death is permanent. The guard's mandibles clicked with what Marcus had learned was amusement among their species. Marcus glanced around at his fellow condemned. There was Crix, a massive Gornathian whose thick hide could probably stop small arms fire. His forearms bulged with muscle that could crush bones to powder. Beside him sat Velna, a crystalline whose translucent body could phase through solid matter at will. Her kind were natural assassins, able to appear and disappear like ghosts. Near the front, Thane, a voidwalker, seemed to flicker in and out of visible spectrum. His people's mastery over dark matter, making them nearly untouchable in combat. Then there were the others. Each species represented brought unique advantages to this deadly game. The aquatic Murhai could survive indefinitely underwater, and possessed sonar capabilities that made stealth nearly impossible around them. The plant-based Silverians could photosynthesize energy directly from the binary suns, and communicate through underground root networks spanning kilometers. Energy beings called Luminari could survive without physical form and manipulate electromagnetic fields with thought alone. What they all shared was a dismissive attitude toward the lone human among them. Marcus caught fragments of their conversations, his universal translator working overtime to process the multilingual discussions happening around him. "The human won't last a day," clicked Crix in Gornathian, his voice like grinding stone. "Their species is pathetically weak, no natural weapons, no special abilities. Just soft flesh and fragile bones. I give him 6 hours," harmonized one of the luminary, its voice like wind chimes in a breeze. "Once the nocturnal predators emerge, that primitive endurance won't matter." Velna's crystalline form chimed softly as she spoke. "Perhaps we should form an alliance to eliminate the obvious threats first. The human can die on his own through natural selection." Marcus said nothing. He had learned long ago that revealing intelligence too early was a mistake. Let them underestimate him. Let them dismiss humanity as the galaxy's newest and weakest member. They had no idea what his species was truly capable of. The shuttle's landing thrusters fired, and the craft settled onto the planet's surface with a heavy thud. Through the small porthole, Marcus could see the landscape that would be his home for however long he survived. Jagged mountains pierced a blood-red sky. Their peaks wreathed in toxic clouds. Strange vegetation grew in twisted formations, adapted to the high radiation and acidic soil. In the distance, something large moved between the rock formations, too far away to identify, but clearly predatory in its movements. The shuttle doors hissed open, and immediately Marcus felt the oppressive heat even through his environmental suit. The atmosphere was barely breathable for most species, requiring constant filtration and protection. The gravity was roughly 1.3 times standard, enough to slow movement and tire muscles faster than normal. Perfect conditions for weeding out the weak quickly. "Remember," announced the Zephyrian Guard, "your suits will maintain life support for 72 hours. After that, you're on your own. Supply drops will occur randomly across the continent. May the strongest survive." The condemned beings filed out of the shuttle onto the alien soil. Marcus noticed how each species immediately began assessing their surroundings through their particular advantages. The Murhai were scanning for water sources with their sonar. The Silverians were testing soil composition with root-like appendages. The Luminari dispersed into energy form to scout the immediate area. Marcus simply stood still and observed. This was what humans did best. What had allowed them to survive and thrive on Earth, despite being physically inferior to most predators. They watched. They learned. They adapted. Within minutes, the natural hierarchy began establishing itself. Crix, the massive Gornathian, started issuing orders to smaller species, claiming the high ground near a cliff face that offered defensive advantages. His forearms made short work of clearing debris and establishing a primitive shelter. Several of the weaker species gravitated toward him, seeking protection in numbers. Thane, the Voidwalker, simply vanished from visible spectrum, his mastery over dark matter making him effectively invisible. Marcus made note of the slight distortions in the air that marked his passage, filing away the information for later use. The crystalline Velna began mapping the area by phasing through solid rock, her body becoming translucent and ghost-like as she moved through the mountain itself. Her reconnaissance abilities were impressive, able to scout terrain that would take others hours to explore. Marcus waited until most of the group had dispersed before making his move. While the others focused on immediate survival needs or establishing dominance, he began doing something none of them expected. He started collecting seemingly worthless items. Scraps of metal from the shuttle's landing burn-off, strange plants that the others avoided, rocks with unusual mineral compositions. "What is the human doing?" observed Crix from his elevated position. "Collecting garbage while we secure resources?" "Typical human behavior," replied one of the Silverians, its voice like rustling leaves. "Their species lacks the intelligence for proper prioritization. They'll be dead before the first night cycle." Marcus ignored their commentary. He had identified 3 things within his first hour that none of the others had noticed. First, the strange plants he was collecting weren't just unusual, they were exhibiting properties that suggested they could neutralize the atmospheric toxins. Second, the metal fragments contained rare earth elements that could be used to modify his environmental suit's power systems. Third, and most importantly, the indigenous predators were leaving distinct territorial markings that followed patterns none of the other species would recognize. As the first day progressed, Marcus watched the social dynamics develop among his fellow prisoners. Several smaller groups formed around the most powerful individuals. Crix commanded 7 followers through intimidation and promises of protection. 3 of the energy beings formed their own collective, sharing information through electromagnetic communication. The aquatic species stayed near a discovered water source, using their sonar to claim the most resource-rich area. What Marcus found most interesting was how quickly they dismissed him entirely. By evening, none of them bothered tracking his movements or considering him a threat. He had become invisible through the simple expedient of being perceived as irrelevant. This was exactly what he had hoped for. As the alien suns set and the nocturnal period began, the temperature dropped rapidly. Most species huddled in their shelters, conserving energy and staying alert for predators. The sounds of the night were ominous. Howls echoed from the mountains, and something large crashed through the twisted forests in the distance. Marcus made his first move under cover of darkness. Using the modified components he had collected, he enhanced his environmental suit's stealth capabilities. The rare earth elements, when properly configured, could absorb and redirect electromagnetic signatures. Combined with techniques he had learned during his military service on Earth, he became effectively invisible to most scanning methods. He approached Crix's camp first. The Gornathian had posted sentries, but they were watching for obvious threats. They weren't expecting a human to move like a shadow through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate silently. Marcus spent 2 hours observing their group dynamics, learning their sleep patterns, and identifying their weaknesses. The Gornathians were strong and heavily armored, but they were also creatures of habit. They relied on their natural advantages so heavily that they had become complacent about actual tactical thinking. Their sentries faced outward, watching for large predators or obvious attacks. None of them considered the possibility of infiltration from below or behind. Marcus moved on to observe the other groups. The energy beings were more challenging to approach, their electromagnetic senses more sensitive than most. But energy creatures had a weakness that few understood. They were vulnerable to certain frequency disruptions, and the modified equipment Marcus carried could generate precisely those frequencies, if needed. The most dangerous group was the one that had formed around Thane, the Voidwalker. Dark matter manipulation was an ability that Marcus had only encountered in theoretical discussions during his imprisonment. But even exotic abilities followed rules, and rules could be exploited by someone who understood the underlying principles. As he moved through the night, Marcus began setting up what would become his greatest advantage. Using the territorial markers he had identified from the indigenous predators, he began creating false trails. The local fauna used scent and pheromone markers to establish hunting grounds and warn others away from dangerous areas. By carefully manipulating these signals, Marcus could redirect predator behavior toward his competitors while keeping the creatures away from his own position. It was a complex process that required understanding both the alien ecosystem and the behavioral patterns of the species he was competing against. But this was what humans excelled at, not raw strength or exotic abilities, but the capacity to understand systems and manipulate them to their advantage. By dawn, Marcus had completed his initial reconnaissance and preparation. He returned to his modest shelter, a simple lean-to that appeared hastily constructed and vulnerable. To any observer, he looked like a struggling human barely managing to survive his first night. The reality was quite different. Marcus had identified the strengths and weaknesses of every group on the planet. He had begun manipulating the local ecosystem to serve his purposes. Most importantly, he had established a pattern of behavior that would keep him invisible to his competitors until it was too late for them to respond effectively. The Zephyrian observation satellites recorded his activities as minimal and non-threatening. The other prisoners continued to dismiss him as irrelevant. The guards monitoring the competition made note of his low probability of survival in their reports. None of them understood that the hunt had already begun. Marcus Chen wasn't just another prisoner thrown onto a hostile world to die for entertainment. He was a predator who had spent his first day learning the terrain and identifying his prey. The lone human had been dismissed and forgotten by his competitors. That had been their first mistake. And in the game they were playing, first mistakes were often fatal ones. Marcus spent the early morning hours of his second day refining his preparations, while the others rested or focused on basic survival needs. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and none of them saw it coming. As the binary suns rose over Kepler 442c, casting the alien landscape in shades of amber and crimson, Marcus emerged from his shelter and began what would appear to the casual observer as another day of struggling human survival. But appearances, as his competitors would soon learn, could be devastatingly deceiving. The second day brought Marcus his first real test when the supply drop occurred at dawn. The Zephyrian transport appeared without warning, dropping a single cargo container in the center of the valley before disappearing into the toxic clouds above. The container held enough supplies to keep 3 or 4 beings alive for a week, but there were still 19 survivors competing for its contents. Marcus watched from his concealed position as the various factions converged on the drop site. Crix's group arrived first, the Gornathian's massive frame leading 7 followers down the rocky slope with the confidence of beings who had never met serious opposition. Behind them, the collective of energy beings flickered in and out of visible spectrum, their electromagnetic communication creating visible aurora effects in the thin atmosphere. What happened next was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. As Crix reached for the container, something erupted from the ground beneath his feet. One of the indigenous predators, a creature resembling a cross between a mole and a dragon, burst through the rocky soil with tooth-lined jaws that could have swallowed a speeder whole. Its hide was covered in natural armor plating that had evolved to deflect the high-energy radiation of the binary suns. The creature had been drawn to the area by the false pheromone trail Marcus had carefully constructed during the night. Using his understanding of the territorial markers, he had essentially sent an invitation to the most dangerous predator in the region, promising fresh meat at the supply drop location. Crix reacted with typical Gornathian directness, using all 4 arms to grapple with the creature's massive head, while his followers scattered. The Gornathian's strength was impressive, but the indigenous predator had evolved on this hostile world, where only the apex hunters survived. Its secondary jaw shot forward like a projectile, forcing Crix to dodge frantically while maintaining his grip. The battle was spectacular and loud, echoing across the valley and drawing the attention of other predators. Marcus had counted on this. Noise meant dinner bells to the native fauna, and soon the supply drop site became a feeding frenzy of alien creatures responding to what they perceived as wounded prey. 3 of Crix's followers died in the first few minutes as smaller predators, attracted by the commotion, swarmed the area. The energy beings tried to intervene using electromagnetic pulses, but their attacks had minimal effect on creatures that had evolved in a high-radiation environment. Their natural bioelectric fields simply absorbed the energy and converted it to enhanced speed and aggression. Marcus observed it all from a kilometer away, using improvised optics created from salvaged materials to track the chaos. This was the second thing humans excelled at that other species consistently underestimated: patience. While every other being rushed toward immediate gains, humans could wait for the perfect moment to act. The supply drop battle raged for 3 hours. When it finally ended, Crix's group had been reduced to 4 members, including himself, all badly injured. 2 energy beings had been forced to abandon their physical forms entirely to escape, leaving them severely weakened. The supply container itself had been partially destroyed, its contents scattered across a battlefield littered with alien corpses. Most importantly for Marcus's plans, the survivors were now focused entirely on each other as threats. The massive battle had demonstrated that the indigenous life forms were far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Every faction would now be looking over their shoulders for native predators, making them less likely to notice a human moving carefully through their territory. Marcus waited until evening before approaching the battlefield. The area stank of alien blood and toxic chemicals leaking from damaged environmental suits. Most of the usable supplies had been claimed or destroyed. But Marcus hadn't come for the obvious prizes. He was interested in what everyone else had ignored. The damaged environmental suits contained components that could be repurposed. The alien corpses provided biological samples that could be analyzed using basic chemical tests. Most importantly, the scattered debris field contained trace amounts of the rare elements he needed to complete his modifications to his own equipment. Working by the light of the smaller sun, Marcus collected what he needed, while carefully avoiding the areas where injured predators might still be lurking. His movements were methodical and efficient, guided by mental maps he had constructed during his observation period. As he worked, Marcus noticed something that confirmed his suspicions about the planet's ecosystem. The indigenous predators weren't just random monsters spawning for the entertainment of the viewing audience. They were part of a complex biological network that responded to specific chemical and pheromonal triggers. The planet itself was alive in ways that the hegemony's scientists had either missed or chosen to ignore for dramatic effect. This gave him an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal, depending on how well he understood the underlying systems. Over the next several days, Marcus began implementing what he privately called the ecosystem gambit. Instead of avoiding the native predators, he started studying them more closely. Using the biological samples he had collected, he began creating a detailed map of their behavioral patterns, territorial boundaries, and communication methods. The breakthrough came on his 5th day when he realized that the creatures weren't just territorial, they were hierarchical. There was an alpha predator somewhere in the mountains that controlled the behavior of the lesser creatures through a combination of pheromonal commands and subsonic vocalizations. Finding and studying the alpha became Marcus's primary objective. While the other survivors continued their desperate struggle for resources and territory, he began tracking the apex predator of an entire alien ecosystem. The hunt led him deep into the mountain ranges, following trace chemical signatures that were invisible to most scanning equipment, but detectable using the improvised analysis tools he had constructed. The journey was dangerous, requiring him to move through territory claimed by creatures that could kill him instantly if they detected his presence. But this was where human endurance became a critical advantage. While other species relied on burst abilities or exotic powers, humans could maintain steady effort over extended periods. Marcus could climb for hours without rest, navigate treacherous terrain in environmental conditions that would exhaust most beings, and maintain focus during extended periods of stress. On the 7th day, he found what he was looking for. The alpha predator was even more impressive than he had imagined. It resembled a massive crystalline spider, its body the size of a small building, but its intelligence was clearly far beyond that of a simple predator. The creature had constructed elaborate tunnel systems throughout the mountain, creating a three-dimensional network that allowed it to monitor and control territory spanning hundreds of square kilometers. More importantly, Marcus discovered that the Alpha was actively managing the ecosystem. It was deliberately maintaining population balances among the various species, ensuring that the planet remained viable for long-term habitation. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was essentially the planet's environmental management system made biological. This discovery changed everything. If Marcus could communicate with the Alpha, he might be able to negotiate rather than fight. But communication required understanding the creature's language, which appeared to be based on complex chemical signatures combined with harmonic vibrations that traveled through the planet's crust itself. Marcus spent 3 days studying the Alpha's communication patterns from concealment. The creature was clearly aware of his presence, but hadn't moved to eliminate him, suggesting either curiosity or evaluation on its part. Using his modified equipment, Marcus began attempting rudimentary communication by replicating the chemical and vibrational patterns he had observed. The first successful exchange was simple. Marcus transmitted what he interpreted as a greeting, and the Alpha responded with what appeared to be acknowledgement. Over the following days, their communication became more sophisticated as Marcus's understanding of the creature's language improved. What he learned was remarkable. The Alpha Predator was essentially the planet's caretaker, maintaining ecological balance and ensuring the survival of all species within sustainable limits. It viewed the competition happening in the valley below as a temporary disruption to natural order, but one that would resolve itself once the foreign elements had been eliminated or integrated into the existing system. Marcus proposed an alternative. Instead of fighting the planet's ecosystem, what if he helped maintain the balance? His species, he explained through their developing communication system, were natural mediators and system managers. Humans could serve as mobile agents, helping to maintain ecological stability across broader territories than the Alpha could directly monitor. The negotiation took 5 days and required Marcus to demonstrate his understanding of ecosystem management by successfully redirecting a territorial dispute between 2 groups of mid-level predators. But eventually, the Alpha accepted his proposal. The alliance Marcus forged with the apex predator of Kepler 442c was unlike anything the hegemony's entertainment producers had anticipated. Instead of fighting for survival, he had integrated himself into the planet's natural systems as a monitoring and management agent. From the Alpha's perspective, this made perfect sense. Humans were clearly intelligent enough to understand complex systems, but physically non-threatening to the established order. They could serve as mobile extensions of the Alpha's awareness and influence without disrupting existing territorial boundaries. From Marcus's perspective, the Alliance provided him with resources and information that made him effectively untouchable by his remaining competitors. The indigenous predators would ignore him as long as he maintained his role in the ecosystem. More importantly, he could direct predator behavior to eliminate threats to his survival without direct confrontation. The other survivors had no idea what had changed, but they began to notice that Marcus Chen seemed to have developed an uncanny ability to avoid danger, while his competitors encountered increasingly hostile wildlife. When Thane the Voidwalker tried to eliminate the human as an easy target, he found himself surrounded by creatures that could somehow detect and track his dark matter manipulations. When the aquatic Merhai attempted to claim the largest water source on the continent, they discovered that the indigenous water predators had suddenly become aggressively territorial and unwilling to share their habitat with off-world species. Marcus had become more than a survivor. He had become part of the planet itself. And through his alliance with the apex predator, he commanded resources that none of his competitors could match or even comprehend. The lone human was no longer fighting for survival. He was managing a planetary ecosystem in preparation for eliminating every other competitor in the game. The hunt was about to enter its final phase, and Marcus Chen had transformed from prey into the apex predator's chosen representative. His competitors still dismissed him as irrelevant, but that perception was about to change dramatically. The transformation in Marcus's capabilities became apparent to the other survivors on day 12, though none of them understood the true cause. What they observed was a human who seemed to have developed supernatural awareness of danger, unlimited access to resources, and an almost magical ability to be exactly where his competitors least expected him. The first dramatic demonstration came when Velna, the crystalline assassin, decided to eliminate what she still perceived as the weakest competitor. Her species' ability to phase through solid matter made her nearly undetectable to most scanning methods. She could become translucent and ghost-like, passing through rock walls and metal barriers as if they didn't exist. Combined with natural weapons that could vibrate at frequencies capable of shattering bone, crystallines were among the galaxy's most feared infiltration specialists. Velna spent 2 days studying Marcus's routine, looking for the perfect opportunity to strike. She observed him collecting plants and samples, apparently oblivious to the danger stalking him. His shelter was primitive and exposed, offering no real protection against a determined assassin. The human seemed to spend long periods sitting motionless, staring at the landscape as if lost in thought. The perfect opportunity came at dawn on day 14. Marcus was sitting alone near a cliff edge, his back turned to the approach route Velna had selected. The crystalline assassin phased through the mountain itself, emerging silently from solid rock just 3 meters behind her target. What happened next defied everything Velna thought she knew about human capabilities. As she solidified and prepared to strike, Marcus spoke without turning around. "Hello, Velna. I've been waiting for you to make your move." The crystalline froze, her translucent form shimmering with surprise. No one should have been able to detect her approach, especially not a human with no apparent sensory enhancements. Marcus turned slowly, and Velna saw something in his eyes that made her step backward instinctively. There was knowledge there, an understanding that seemed to encompass far more than any single being should possess about their current situation. "You're wondering how I knew you were coming," Marcus said conversationally. "The answer is simple. This planet told me." Before Velna could process that statement fully, the ground beneath her feet erupted. Not with indigenous predators this time, but with something far more sophisticated. Root systems belonging to the Silverian plant people burst through the rocky soil. But these weren't random growths. They moved with purpose and intelligence, wrapping around Velna's legs with crushing force. The crystalline tried to phase through the organic restraints, but found that her ability wasn't working properly. The plant matter was somehow interfering with her molecular cohesion, preventing her from shifting to translucent form. "The Silverians in Crix's remaining group have been very helpful," Marcus explained as Velna struggled against the tightening roots. "They didn't realize they were contributing to a communication network that spans the entire continent. Every plant on this world is connected through underground root systems. When I integrated with the ecosystem, I gained access to that network." Marcus stood and approached the trapped assassin. "You've been sending location updates to your allies through crystalline resonance frequency. I've been monitoring those communications for a week. I know where every survivor is located, what resources they have, and what strategies they're planning." The implications of this revelation struck Velna like a physical blow. If the human had access to planet-wide surveillance and communication networks, then none of them had any privacy or tactical advantage. Their every move was being observed and analyzed by an intelligence that understood their capabilities better than they understood his. "What do you want?" Velna managed to ask as the roots continued to tighten around her limbs. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I want you to deliver a message to the others. Tell them that the rules of the game have changed. This isn't about individual survival anymore. It's about ecosystem integration. Those who can adapt to become part of this world's natural systems will be allowed to continue existing. Those who insist on fighting the planet itself will be eliminated by it. And if we refuse?" Velna's crystalline form was beginning to show stress fractures from the pressure being applied by the organic restraints. "Then you'll discover what happens when an entire planetary ecosystem decides you're a threat to its stability," Marcus replied. "I'm offering you a choice that the others won't get. Join me in maintaining the balance, or be removed as a disruptive element." Velna was silent for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications. If Marcus had truly formed an alliance with the planet's ecosystem, then fighting him would be like fighting the world itself. But joining him would mean abandoning any hope of winning the competition and gaining freedom. "What assurance do I have that you won't eliminate me later?" she finally asked. Marcus smiled, and there was something genuinely reassuring in the expression. "Because I need administrators." Managing a planetary ecosystem is complex work that requires multiple perspectives and skill sets. Your ability to phase through solid matter makes you invaluable for monitoring underground systems and geological stability. You'd be more useful to me alive and cooperative than dead. End quote. The offer was logical, even appealing in its way. Instead of fighting for survival against increasingly impossible odds, Velna would become part of a management system for an entire world. The work would be challenging and meaningful, far more interesting than simply winning a gladiatorial competition. If I agree, what happens to the others? She asked. That depends on their choices, Marcus replied. Some will adapt, others won't. The ecosystem will make those determinations based on their actions and attitudes toward integration. Velna made her decision. I accept your offer. Release me, and I'll help you establish the new system. The roots binding her immediately loosened, allowing the crystalline to regain her footing. As circulation returned to her limbs, Velna realized that the restraints had been precisely calibrated to apply pressure without causing permanent damage. Marcus had been negotiating from a position of absolute superiority, while still offering her a genuine choice. Welcome to planetary management, Marcus said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Your first assignment will be mapping the underground tunnel systems in the southern continent. The Alpha Predator wants to establish monitoring stations there to track tectonic stability. As they walked back toward Marcus's base camp, Velna found herself asking questions about the ecosystem integration process. What she learned was both fascinating and terrifying from the perspective of her former competitors. Marcus had essentially become the human interface for a planetary intelligence that operated on scales of time and space that most individual beings couldn't comprehend. The Alpha Predator wasn't just a large creature. It was the neurological center of a distributed biological network that included every living thing on the planet. When Marcus communicated with the Alpha, he was accessing a form of collective intelligence that processed information from millions of organisms simultaneously. The plant networks provided sensory data about chemical changes, electromagnetic fields, and structural vibrations across the entire continental mass. The various predator species served as mobile monitoring units, reporting on ecological conditions in their territories through chemical and harmonic communication systems. Marcus's role was to serve as a translator and coordinator, helping the collective intelligence understand and respond to the presence of off-world species. His human perspective allowed him to interpret the motivations and likely actions of his competitors in ways that the purely biological intelligence couldn't process directly. In return, Marcus gained access to resources and capabilities that exceeded anything available to individual competitors. He could coordinate the actions of creatures across vast distances, redirect environmental resources to support his activities, and monitor the entire competition through sensory networks that his opponents couldn't detect or understand. The demonstration of this power came 3 days later, when Crix's remaining group attempted to assault what they believed was Marcus's poorly defended base camp. The Gornathian had been reduced to leading only 2 followers after continuous losses to predator attacks, but his species' natural aggression made retreat impossible. Better to die fighting than to slowly waste away from attrition. What Crix found at the coordinates he had been given was not the primitive shelter he expected, but a complex installation integrated into the mountain itself. Crystalline formations provided structural support and communication interfaces. Organic components grown from modified plant matter served as environmental controls and power systems. Indigenous predators moved through the facility as guards and maintenance workers, their behavior coordinated through the harmonic communication network. Marcus emerged to meet them, flanked by Velna and accompanied by 2 of the smaller alpha predators serving as escorts. He looked completely at ease, like a being who had found his natural element. Hello, Crix, Marcus said calmly. I've been expecting you. Would you like to discuss integration into the planetary management system, or shall we proceed directly to your elimination? The Gornathian's forearms flexed instinctively, his warrior instincts recognizing a superior opponent even when his intellect couldn't process how such a reversal was possible. You're still just a human, Crix growled, his voice like grinding stone. Weak flesh and brittle bones. I can tear you apart with my bare hands. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about human physical limitations. But you're making the same mistake that all the others made. You're thinking about this as individual combat, when it's actually ecosystem management. The ground beneath Crix's feet began to vibrate with subsonic harmonics that resonated through his massive frame. The vibrations weren't random. They were precisely calibrated to interfere with Gornathian nervous system function. Within seconds, Crix found his coordination failing as his own body betrayed him. The planet doesn't like invasive species that refuse to integrate, Marcus explained as Crix struggled to maintain his footing. It has very effective methods for dealing with biological threats. The two remaining followers of Crix turned to flee, but found their path blocked by indigenous predators that had surrounded the area during the conversation. The creatures weren't attacking, simply preventing escape while waiting for instructions from the coordinating intelligence. Last chance, Marcus offered. Integration or elimination. Choose quickly, because the ecosystem has limited patience for beings that won't fulfill a productive role. Crix made his choice by charging directly at Marcus with all four arms extended for a killing blow. It was a magnificent display of Gornathian combat prowess. The kind of move that would have crushed any individual opponent through sheer physical superiority. Marcus didn't try to dodge or block the attack. Instead, he simply stepped aside and allowed the planet itself to respond. The harmonic vibrations intensified, and Crix found himself collapsing as his own muscular system locked up in response to the neural interference. The great Gornathian warrior, who had dominated the early stages of the competition through raw physical power, fell unconscious at the feet of the human he had dismissed as pathetically weak. Sedation, not death, Marcus instructed the indigenous predators. He'll be relocated to a territory where his aggressive instincts can be redirected toward useful purposes. Ecosystem maintenance requires all types of capabilities, including physical ones. As Crix was carried away by creatures that could have devoured him instantly but chose restraint instead, Marcus turned to address the two remaining followers. You have the same choice he did, Marcus said. But you have the advantage of seeing what integration looks like compared to resistance. What will it be? Both of the survivors chose integration. Within hours, they had been assigned roles in the expanding planetary management network and were beginning their education in ecosystem coordination. Marcus now controlled not just his own survival, but the fate of every remaining competitor. The lone human had become the dominant force in a game designed to eliminate him first. And the final phase of his plan was about to begin. By day 20, Marcus had fundamentally altered the nature of the competition, without the hegemony's entertainment producers realizing what was happening. From their orbital observation platforms, they were recording what appeared to be an unusually collaborative season of Survival World 7. The various species seemed to be working together more than fighting, which made for interesting viewing but didn't match the bloodsport format their audiences expected. What the producers couldn't see through their remote monitoring systems was that Marcus had effectively converted a gladiatorial competition into a planetary management training program. The survivors weren't cooperating by choice so much as they were being integrated into a biological network that made conflict counterproductive. The crystalline assassin Velna had become his chief administrator for underground systems monitoring. Her ability to phase through solid matter made her invaluable for mapping the complex tunnel networks that connected different regions of the continent. More importantly, she had adapted quickly to thinking in terms of ecosystem maintenance rather than individual survival. The two former followers of Crix had been assigned to resource management, using their species' natural strength for heavy construction work, while learning to coordinate their activities through the harmonic communication system. They were building monitoring stations and environmental control systems that would help maintain the planet's ecological balance. Even the energy beings who had initially seemed most incompatible with biological systems had found roles in the network. Their ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields made them excellent coordinators for the planet's bioelectrical communication systems. They served as living relay stations, amplifying and directing the harmonic frequencies that allowed rapid communication across vast distances. But the most significant development was happening beyond the view of the orbital observers. Marcus wasn't just managing the survivors who had chosen integration. He was preparing for contact with the hegemony itself. The Alpha Predator had been very clear during their communications. Kepler 442c was not an uninhabited world that could be used casually for entertainment purposes. It was a fully functional ecosystem with its own intelligence and interests. The survival competitions being held on its surface were violations of planetary sovereignty that could not be allowed to continue. Marcus's role had evolved beyond simple survival into serving as a diplomatic representative for a planetary intelligence that was prepared to defend itself against further exploitation. The alliance he had formed wasn't just about winning a gladiatorial competition. It was about preventing future competitions from happening at all. The plan they developed together was elegant in its complexity. Rather than revealing the planet's true nature through direct confrontation, they would use the existing competition format to demonstrate capabilities that would force the hegemony to reassess their assumptions about uninhabited worlds. The first phase involved eliminating the remaining competitors in ways that would appear natural to external observers, while demonstrating increasingly sophisticated coordination among indigenous life forms. The second phase would involve using the survivors as a communication interface to negotiate directly with hegemony officials. Thane, the Voidwalker, presented the most complex challenge among the remaining competitors. His mastery over dark matter manipulation made him nearly undetectable to most scanning methods and virtually untouchable in direct confrontation. He had avoided integration attempts by simply vanishing from normal space whenever Marcus approached, emerging later in completely different locations. But dark matter manipulation, like all abilities, followed specific physical laws that could be understood and countered by beings who took the time to study the underlying principles. Marcus had spent a week analyzing Thane's movement patterns and energy signatures, working with the Alpha Predator to develop countermeasures. The solution came from understanding that dark matter existed in constant interaction with normal matter through gravitational fields. While Thane could shift his physical form into dark matter states, he couldn't eliminate his gravitational signature entirely. The planet's geological sensors could track those gravitational fluctuations with sufficient precision to predict his location and movement patterns. More importantly, Marcus discovered that the harmonic communication system used by the indigenous predators operated on frequencies that interfered with dark matter cohesion. By modulating the planetary communication network to specific resonance patterns, they could force Thane back into normal matter states, whether he wanted to materialize or not. The confrontation happened at dawn, on day 23. Thane had been stalking what he believed was an isolated work crew, setting up a monitoring station in the northern valleys. His plan was to eliminate the workers and destroy their equipment, disrupting whatever system Marcus had established while remaining undetectable through dark matter concealment. As Thane approached his targets while shifted into dark matter form, the entire mountain range began to vibrate with harmonic frequencies specifically calibrated to disrupt dark matter cohesion. He found himself forced back into normal space against his will, materializing in full view of the work crew he had been planning to ambush. "Welcome back to normal space, Thane," Marcus said, emerging from concealment among the workers. "We need to discuss your integration into planetary management systems." The Voidwalker immediately tried to shift back into dark matter form, but found that the harmonic interference made the transition impossible. He was trapped in normal space, vulnerable for the first time since the competition began. "You cannot hold me here," Thane declared, his voice distorted by the gravitational fields he generated around his physical form. "Dark matter transcends your primitive understanding of physics." Marcus nodded respectfully. "You're right that dark matter transcends my understanding. But you're wrong about it transcending the planet's understanding. This world has been dealing with gravitational anomalies for millions of years. The indigenous life forms have evolved sophisticated methods for detecting and interacting with exotic matter states." To demonstrate his point, Marcus gestured toward the surrounding landscape. Thane noticed for the first time that the terrain itself was responding to his presence. Rock formations were shifting slightly to maintain gravitational equilibrium. Plant life was orienting itself to compensate for the space-time distortions created by his dark matter manipulations. "The entire ecosystem has been tracking your movements since the day you arrived," Marcus explained. "Dark matter manipulation creates detectable effects on local space-time geometry. You haven't been invisible to the planetary intelligence. You've been under constant observation." The implications of this revelation struck Thane like a physical blow. His greatest advantage, the ability that had kept him alive through countless conflicts, was useless against an opponent that could detect and counter exotic matter manipulation. "What do you want from me?" Thane asked, his distorted voice carrying a note of defeat. "The same thing I want from everyone," Marcus replied. "Integration into the planetary management network. Your dark matter manipulation abilities would be invaluable for monitoring space-time stability and detecting gravitational anomalies that could threaten the ecosystem." "And if I refuse?" Marcus gestured again, and the harmonic frequencies intensified. Thane felt his control over dark matter manipulation slip even further, his exotic abilities being systematically neutralized by planetary-scale interference patterns. "Then you'll discover that this world has very effective methods for containing exotic matter phenomena," Marcus said. "The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The ecosystem has limited patience for beings that threaten its stability." Thane made the same choice that the others had made when faced with integration or elimination. Within hours, he had been assigned to gravitational monitoring duties and was beginning his education in planetary-scale space-time management. With Thane's integration, Marcus had successfully absorbed every competitor into the planetary management network. What had started as a gladiatorial competition had become a comprehensive staffing program for a world that was preparing to reveal its true nature to the hegemony. The final phase of Marcus's plan began on day 25, when the regularly scheduled supply drop failed to arrive on schedule. This wasn't an oversight by the hegemony's logistics coordinators. It was the first sign that something was seriously wrong with their supposedly uninhabited entertainment world. The orbital observation platforms had detected increasingly unusual activity on the planet's surface. What appeared to be coordinated behavior among indigenous life forms, technological constructions that seemed to integrate biological and mechanical components in ways that suggested intelligence behind their design. Most disturbing of all, communication signals being transmitted from the surface that followed patterns too complex to be naturally occurring. Marcus stood in the central command center of what had once been a primitive survival shelter, but was now a sophisticated interface between human intelligence and planetary consciousness. Around him, his former competitors worked at various monitoring stations, their unique abilities integrated into a management system that coordinated activities across the entire continental mass. Through the Alpha Predator's sensory networks, Marcus could perceive the hegemony's orbital platforms as easily as if they were standing in the same room. Their attempts at stealth were useless against a planetary intelligence that could detect gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic emissions, and spatial distortions from anywhere within its solar system. "Are we ready to make contact?" Marcus asked, his question directed both to his immediate companions and to the vast biological intelligence that connected them all to the planet's consciousness. The response came as harmonics that resonated through the mountain itself, a complex symphony of agreement and anticipation that spoke of a world preparing to announce its existence to the galaxy. Marcus activated the communication systems they had built, preparing to transmit a message that would fundamentally change the relationship between the hegemony and the worlds they casually exploited for entertainment. The lone human who had been dismissed as the weakest competitor was about to reveal himself as the representative of a planetary intelligence that would no longer tolerate violations of its sovereignty. The final phase of the hunt was beginning, and this time the hegemony itself was the prey. Hegemony orbital platforms. "This is Marcus Chen, speaking on behalf of the planetary consciousness of Kepler 442c, he began, his voice being amplified and transmitted through biological systems that turned the entire mountain range into a communications array. "We need to discuss the immediate cessation of gladiatorial activities on this world, and the recognition of planetary sovereignty rights for all inhabited systems currently being exploited by your entertainment industry." The message that followed would reshape the balance of power between individual species and planetary intelligences throughout the galaxy. But that was a conversation for tomorrow. Today, Marcus was content to savor the fact that the human who had been expected to die first had become the voice of an entire world demanding its freedom. The response from the hegemony orbital platforms came within minutes of Marcus's transmission, but it wasn't the diplomatic acknowledgement he had hoped for. Instead, it was a squadron of military vessels dropping out of hyperspace, with weapons already charging for planetary bombardment. "Unknown entities on Kepler 442c," came the authoritative voice of what Marcus recognized as a hegemony fleet commander. You are interfering with sanctioned entertainment activities in violation of multiple galactic treaties. Surrender immediately, or face destruction. Marcus felt the mountain range vibrate with what he had learned to recognize as the planet's version of laughter. Through his connection to the Alpha Predator, he could sense the vast intelligence's amusement at the hegemony's assumption that military force would resolve this situation. Fleet Commander, Marcus replied, his voice now being amplified through organic systems across multiple continents. I believe you misunderstand the nature of this situation. Allow me to provide some clarification. What happened next would be studied by military strategists and xenobiologists for generations to come. The planet of Kepler, 442c, revealed itself to be not just inhabited, but a single vast organism with capabilities that redefined what it meant to be alive. The first demonstration was subtle. The toxic atmosphere that had made the world hostile to most forms of life suddenly cleared in a perfect sphere around each orbital platform. The hegemony ships found themselves surrounded by breathable atmosphere, extending thousands of kilometers into space, a feat that should have been thermodynamically impossible. The atmospheric conditions you've been monitoring, Marcus explained calmly, are maintained artificially as a defense mechanism. This world can create any environmental conditions it chooses within its gravitational influence. The fleet commander's response was predictably aggressive. Defensive capabilities do not grant you sovereignty rights. Prepare for immediate bombardment. The energy beams that lanced down from the hegemony warships never reached the planetary surface. Instead, they were absorbed by what appeared to be empty space. Their destructive force converted into harmless light patterns that danced through the atmosphere like aurora displays. Marcus continued his explanation while military weapons failed to function around them. The planetary consciousness has been aware of your orbital platforms since they first entered the system. It has been analyzing your technology and developing appropriate countermeasures. Your weapons operate on principles that this world understood and mastered millions of years ago. Through the biocommunication network, Marcus could sense the planet extending its influence outward, enveloping the hegemony fleet in what humans might call an electromagnetic field, but which was actually something far more sophisticated. The ships weren't being attacked. They were being gently but irresistibly drawn into stable orbits that prevented them from leaving or threatening the surface. This is impossible, transmitted the fleet commander, his voice now carrying notes of confusion and growing fear. Our sensors show no technological infrastructure capable of generating these effects. That's because you're looking for technology as you understand it, Marcus replied. This planet doesn't build machines to solve problems. It evolves biological systems that accomplish the same tasks more efficiently. What you're experiencing is biotechnology that has had geological time periods to develop and refine itself. The demonstration continued as the planet revealed more of its capabilities. Asteroid-sized objects began emerging from what appeared to be empty space around the system's outer planets. They weren't ships in any conventional sense, but rather biological constructs that had been lying dormant in the asteroid belt, waiting for instructions from the planetary consciousness. Fleet Commander, you now have approximately 47 biological platforms capable of faster-than-light travel positioned throughout your fleet formation, Marcus reported with professional courtesy. Each one is equipped with defensive and offensive capabilities that exceed anything in your current arsenal. However, they are under strict instructions to avoid causing harm to your crews unless absolutely necessary. The silence from the hegemony fleet stretched for several minutes as the fleet commander presumably consulted with his superiors about how to handle a situation that had evolved far beyond their operational parameters. When the response came, it was from a different voice entirely, one that Marcus recognized from hegemony news broadcasts as belonging to High Administrator Zenth, one of the most powerful officials in the galactic government. Human representative, came the measured tones of the High Administrator. I am authorized to negotiate on behalf of the hegemony. What are your terms for resolving this situation? Okay. I have C. Also. I have C. I have C. I have C. I have C. Marcus smiled, knowing that his expression was being transmitted through bio-optical systems that made him visible to every ship in the fleet. My terms are simple. High Administrator. Immediate cessation of all entertainment activities on inhabited worlds throughout hegemony space. Formal recognition of planetary sovereignty rights for biological intelligences, and the establishment of diplomatic protocols for future interactions with world-class conscious entities. You're demanding changes to fundamental principles of galactic governance, the High Administrator replied. The economic implications alone would destabilize multiple sectors. The alternative, Marcus said calmly, is that this planet begins sharing its biotechnological capabilities with other worlds that object to being exploited for entertainment purposes. I suspect there are quite a few inhabited systems that would be interested in developing the ability to defend themselves against casual exploitation. Through the biocommunication network, Marcus could sense the planet's vast intelligence, considering possibilities that spanned interstellar scales. Other worlds throughout the galaxy where similar consciousness might exist, waiting for an example of successful resistance to galactic exploitation. The implications were staggering. The High Administrator clearly understood the threat. You're suggesting the potential for widespread rebellion among planetary intelligences. I'm pointing out that this world isn't unique, Marcus replied. Biological consciousness, capable of planetary-scale coordination, probably exists on thousands of worlds throughout the galaxy. Most of them have simply never had reason to reveal themselves. But if word spreads about successful resistance to exploitation, that situation could change rapidly. The negotiation that followed lasted 18 hours and involved direct communication between the hegemony's highest officials and the planetary consciousness itself, with Marcus serving as translator and cultural interpreter. The result was a treaty that fundamentally altered the relationship between individual species and the worlds they inhabited. The Planetary Sovereignty Accords, as they became known throughout the galaxy, established formal recognition of world-class biological intelligences as sovereign entities with full diplomatic rights. More importantly, they created legal frameworks for identifying and protecting inhabited worlds that might harbor such consciousness. For Marcus, personally, the treaty included full pardons for all participants in what became known as the last competition, along with formal recognition of his role as humanity's first planetary ambassador. His species, which had been dismissed as weak and irrelevant by most galactic civilizations, suddenly found themselves in demand as mediators and interpreters between individual consciousness and planetary intelligence. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans had gained galactic respect not through superior strength or exotic abilities, but through their capacity for understanding and communicating with forms of intelligence that other species couldn't even recognize as conscious. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same valley where the competition had begun, but the landscape had been transformed. What had once been a hostile survival arena was now a thriving research and diplomatic center, where beings from across the galaxy came to study planetary consciousness and learn techniques for ecosystem integration. Velna had become the director of subsurface studies, her phasing abilities making her invaluable for exploring the complex underground networks that connected different regions of the planet's consciousness. The former Gornathian followers had established themselves as specialists in biomechanical engineering, designing interfaces that allowed individual beings to communicate more effectively with planetary intelligence. Even Thane had found his calling, using his dark matter manipulation abilities to study the gravitational effects of consciousness operating on planetary scales. His research was contributing to understanding of how biological intelligence could develop capabilities that seemed to violate conventional physics. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity itself. The human capacity for adaptation, patience, and systematic understanding of complex systems had proven to be exactly what was needed for the galaxy's next phase of development. Marcus received a transmission from Earth that morning, informing him that the Human Colonial Authority had been formally invited to join the Galactic Council as specialists in planetary consciousness studies. Humanity would serve as mediators and interpreters, helping to identify inhabited worlds and establish diplomatic relationships with planetary intelligences throughout known space. Not bad for the species everyone expected to go extinct first, Marcus said to himself, looking out over a landscape where beings from dozens of different worlds worked together to understand forms of consciousness that spanned entire planets. The alpha predator's response came as harmonics that resonated through the mountain, A complex symphony of agreement and satisfaction that spoke of a partnership between human intelligence and planetary consciousness that would reshape the galaxy. Marcus Chen had entered the competition as a condemned prisoner expected to die quickly and forgotten. He was leaving it as the ambassador for a form of consciousness that most beings hadn't even known existed, representing not just his own species but the interests of worlds throughout the galaxy that were finally being recognized as living entities in their own right. The lone human had indeed emerged as a predator, but not in the way anyone had expected. He had become the apex predator of systems rather than individuals, the hunter of institutions rather than people, the ultimate survivor not through violence but through understanding. In the end, the greatest threat to the established order hadn't been superior strength or exotic abilities. It had been the simple human capacity to listen to intelligence that spoke in frequencies other species couldn't hear, to recognize consciousness in forms other beings couldn't perceive, and to serve as a bridge between forms of awareness that spanned scales from individual minds to planetary consciousness. The entertainment industry's attempt to create a blood sport had accidentally triggered the next phase of galactic evolution, and at the center of that transformation was a human who had been dismissed as weak and irrelevant, but who had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was simply the ability to understand what others couldn't see. Marcus smiled as he prepared for another day of diplomatic work between species and worlds. The hunt had ended, but the real adventure was just beginning.